Hi everyone! So last night I played the Shadow Step Rogue finally, this mystical setup that we had been theorizing about for a while. You might have heard about this setup because this is something that came about after the PTR was over and no one really had any chance of playing it until the season actually goes live. So I've been gearing up for this and I tried it out last night. And I wanted to share with me my thoughts and my experiences. So the way that this setup works is that this is based on a new Victimize, the buffed Victimize passive, and the very high lucky hit chance of Shadow Step. Victimize has a lucky hit chance of 50%, Shadow Step has 100%. So basically every second Shadow Step would trigger a Victimize explosion. But with enough lucky hit bonus, if you stack up another 100% bonus, then you can get your Shadow Step to 200, guaranteeing a Victimize explosion. So that was the premise of the entire build. Every Shadow Step creates a Victimize explosion. And then you stack up a bunch of damage modifiers. We have, for example, the Caltrops, the Smoke Grenade, the Cold Imbue, and some other stuff. And you do like one massive nuke that is usually a single target ability, but then spreads it to everything around. And you can see this in action here right now. It actually does look really cool when it works. So you do like this Shadow Step with all the buffs up, and then the entire pack just pops from this Victimizer explosion. It does feel actually pretty amazing. However, when Season 4 launched, there were a lot of nerfs that were not announced, undocumented changes, and all that kind of stuff that made this setup much harder to execute and to build. We already expected this to be like a very late game setup. For example, here on Maxraw, Mippy, who originally concocted the idea of this Shadow Step build, actually wrote a guide as well. And he made this build. And it turns out that with all these nerfs to, for example, the lucky hit chances, they can roll on your gear. You can get lower values now than you could on the PTR. And there seems to be like some other stuff. It is very difficult to actually make this setup properly function and get to this 100% lucky hit chance bonus breakpoint where every single Shadow Step guarantees an explosion. So that is kind of a problem here. So it was already a late game build and it has become even more late game now because now you need to go even more ham on getting that lucky hit up. You need to get that crit up, you need to get a bunch of other stats so you actually survive, because it's kind of scary as well sometimes when monsters don't die immediately. And overall, it was like kind of rough to gear for this, to say the least. My setup here was not fully optimized. I did have basically everything masterwork to 8. I had at least one greater affix on pretty much all pieces that were pretty decent. I had pretty solid stuff, to be fair. Not perfect. There can still be like, better optimizations here, but I had been going up for this for a while. So this is what you need to know. And this is kind of what I got in the end. Now, it also seems like there is just something going on with lucky hits in general for this build, and maybe certain lucky hit modifiers not applying as they should, because as you see here, sometimes I do not actually get a Victimized explosion every single time, even though I should, or at least very close. I was like 2% chance to not get one or something, but it felt more like 20% to me. So 80% of the time maybe it would work, and 20% of the time I would just not get the pop. And I did not really understand why just yet. So besides lucky hit chance from gear, for example, you can also get lucky hit chance from the Elixir of Advantage here. So I have not specifically tested if this lucky hit, for example, is maybe working or maybe not working. Or Mippy also mentioned to me that it may be the Alchemist Fortune passive here. So usually you try to Cold Imbue your Shadow Step and then get this extra 15% lucky hit. So you usually have to hit 85% and then you would have plus 15 from this, giving you the 100% breakpoint so that you get a guaranteed victimized pop. But it may actually just not apply, or maybe something else is like dysfunctional here, making this somewhat more clunky than it should be. Probably due to bugs. That being said though, you just saw in this clip that was running in the background here, it was actually kind of fast, at least in this pit 50 I was doing. That's not a really high benchmark, but I was also just doing like one of my first runs with this, so I was just like trying it out. I was not playing it optimally, so this is something to keep in mind. This is a setup that actually requires a lot of timing, setup. There is a lot of like a skill ceiling basically to hit, and I was not doing that optimally just yet. So sometimes I was just like not pressing my buttons in the correct order. For example, you want to go into the pack, you want to put the Caltrops down, then you want to smoke grenade so that you get the buff from the synergy aspect. Then you want to do a puncture so that you get a buff from the tricks or the trades and apply vulnerable. And then you want to do a Shadow Step with the Cold Imbue. So there's a lot of buttons to press basically. And sometimes, I would get a bit like panicked or I was just like, wasn't really in a groove just yet. So if I play this more, I would probably do this better. But it just turns out that with the inconsistency of the lucky hits just not always working the way I expect them to, and also the lack of damage, it just didn't really feel like such a great setup to me so far. So I still have my gear lying around, but I actually spec'd out of this again because I felt like I don't really want to stick to this. And on top of this, me playing on hardcore made this feel very unsafe. So I do not really recommend this on hardcore because, well, sometimes you kill stuff instantly and sometimes you don't, and you never really know what of the two will happen. And this doesn't really feel consistent enough for me to really play around with this. And also you use your unstoppable, the Shadow Step, which is usually like the CC break of rogues, for offense. So you try to, offensively jump in, and then you don't have a Shadow Step ready sometimes, which is a bit annoying as well. So in that case, you can easily get CC'd and die on hardcore. So I kind of felt scary here, at least on the higher tiers, when stuff started leveling a little bit longer. Sometimes the pops happen and sometimes they don't, as you see here. And that is kind of too clunky for my tastes. Another problem that we've identified is also the Ravagers aspect. So you have this on the neck here, which is the Shadow Step aspect that gives you a second charge, and then also refund a charge when you kill something with Shadow Step. Now it turns out that this effect does not trigger if the Victimize explosion kills the target. And it has to be the Shadow Step damage itself that does that. Now theoretically, you can try to outplay this a little bit and just hit like the small targets and hope that you finish it, and then you get the pop on Victimize, killing the rest of the pack. But most of the time, this is not really feasible. And as well, like in higher tiers, you just don't really have a chance even of killing the small guys. Like your Shadow Step might hit for like a few million or something like that. And then you get like the Victimize explosion and does like 5 times that amount or 10 times that amount or something like that. It's a lot. So most of the damage comes from the Victimize explosion, even on a single target, and not the Shadow Step. So it's very hard to actually trigger this Ravagers effect, making it so that he can't really sustain the Shadow Step charges all the time. So that was a bit of a downside here as well. Now, I guess that eventually Blizzard might fix any kind of bugs that we have with lucky hits that I just talked about. So it seems like there needs to be some more investigation, but there might be some improvements coming. But I don't think that this Ravagers effect is going to change, because this is just kind of how the game works, I guess. It's not the Shadow Step killing the target, it's the Victimize explosion killing the target, not giving you the Ravagers reset, and I don't think anything will change about that. Now there are some ways around that, most notably the hectic aspect. So I was using this one instead of another offensive aspect. So I was just like trying to puncture a little bit more, trying to reset my Shadow Step and my other cooldowns a little bit more. But the fact that I would not get those refunds was making it way more clunky than it should have been. So that's a bit of a bummer here. All this being said though, if you really like Shadow Step and you want to play this kind of fantasy, you can, I would say. So it does kind of work. It's not like a great build. We had it like ranked in A tier because we were a bit more optimistic about how everything works. And then we had, discovered these lucky hit problems. We had discovered this Ravagers problem, and it just doesn't really feel like as good as it should have been, I guess. So we're probably going to rank it down a little bit on the tier list once we do the next update. But technically it's still a build, it's still there and playable if you really want. As you can see here, I'm cruising for a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon anyway, so it's not really the highest benchmark anymore these days, but at least you can play that. So if you really want to do some Shadow Step action, yeah, here you are. So there's the setup, there's the build, and you just have to kind of deal with this lucky hit clunkiness until you have really, really good gear. So once you have like the optimal setup, I guess it won't really have that problem anymore. And for example, in a bit lower end content, you will actually get those Ravager Shadow Step charge resets pretty reliably. So you won't have this cooldown clunkiness as well. So while I think that the concept is actually really fun to play, I just hope that maybe in the future we're gonna get some updates here and see if we can, maybe get more lucky hit, or maybe just make this feel better in some way. I know Mippy is working on this, so he has been on top of this guide. He already did a little update here, for example, mentioned his elixir and these kind of things, and he's trying to improve this setup more. Personally, I don't think I will stick to this very much. So we'll see, maybe there's going to be like some new innovation here, or maybe some other patch, and we'll come back to this. But for now, I guess I'm going to stick to some other rogue builds and some other classes as well. But I wanted to share with you what we got here. I'm going to link the guide and also my planner here. I tweaked this a little bit to my own liking if you want to check it out. So Shadow Step, it kind of works, but it's not like a top tier rogue build as we had hoped. So this sums it up pretty much. Hope you liked this one, and I'll see you guys next time.